This lecture is to discuss the different types of natural building techniques and materials and a little bit about their history and use. Natural building techniques are simply techniques that draw from local resources. Those are the ones that are going to be the most sustainable. For example, in the southwestern United States, we have a lot of clay, and Adobe and cob homes would be the most sustainable natural technique to use. In some parts of the southwestern United States, like if you just go to Riverside, there's tons of rock there, and a lot of the older homes are made of rock. That makes sense. The rocks were plentiful. Why not make your dwellings out of them instead of buying things like when we make all of our timber framed homes that are common around most of the United States. A lot of that timber comes from China, Russia. It used to come from Canada and the United States, but it's all from very far away. So again, natural building techniques are focused on some traditional forms of home building, but mostly just ecological choices and conservative choices in resources, which leaves you the choices of local materials for your homes. Let's look at Adobe first. So Adobe is one of the oldest natural building techniques, although it wasn't called natural building when people built the mission. It was just the material that was used to build with. Adobe is typically made into bricks, so you're taking clay, some kind of fiber, a little bit of possibly some sand. And back in the old days, if you've ever been to like the Purissima mission, you can make some yourself, some Adobe the old way, which was just taking clay, a little bit of sand, and some manure. Manure was the fiber that held it together. It gave that Adobe brick its tensile strength. So we have a lot of Adobe buildings around southwestern United States, and that was an early form of a natural building. Those are made into bricks and stacked on top of each other with some kind of mortar in between. Before that, Adobe was not quite as plentiful, and other forms of natural building were used by indigenous peoples in the southwest United States. They varied according to the location. I got to visit some of the Pueblo Indians in and around Santa Fe, New Mexico, and some of the restoration and renovation of the mission there was involved making a lot of Adobe bricks to replace the ones that have been worn away. And these are different piles of just pretty much pure clay. We've got a reddish clay, a tan clay, and in the next picture you'll see even a greenish clay. Here it is. That reddish clay is from the last image. But these clays were all found very close to each other in this local region, and those were used to make the Adobe bricks that were made from these missions. Before the mission era and before the Spanish came, the Pueblo Indians, which is a Spanish name for them, but they had their own forms of dwellings which were not related to Adobe, but we'll talk about those a little bit later. As I said, Adobe is typically made into bricks, and those bricks are stacked and with some kind of mortar in between. This makes the Adobe structures somewhat unstable because every place that the brick is on top of another brick is a shearing zone. So if there was an earthquake or something to weaken that wall, there's all these mortars, these places between those bricks are weak spots in this whole structure. So although the mission here in Santa Barbara, as an example, looks very sturdy and strong, it has been knocked down twice by earthquakes, and it is, as far as the large earthen structure, it's not as stable as other types of earthen structures like cob. Some of the oldest buildings in the United States are made out of Adobe, and Adobe is sand, water, fiber, and clay. And like I said, in the olden days, the fiber came from manure. And they're joined by a mortar, which is the same recipe, but without the fiber in it. And then often they're covered with some kind of lime plaster. A plaster is sometimes we think of it as called stucco now, but the plaster in the old days was just sand, Adobe, and water. A little bit of really finely ground fiber. So, and then that would be painted over, and it kind of had that white, smooth look that we call stucco now. The difference is stucco is made from a cement base, and it's impermeable and doesn't breathe. Plaster made from the Adobe base is porous, and it can allow gases to go through it. And so if there accumulates moisture inside, it can dry out and vent, whereas stucco will hold the moisture inside and it tends to rot the wall over time. And here's the picture of the mission in the Picos Pueblos mission in Santa Fe that they're trying to restore. And you can see why they're building those different colored Adobe bricks from different colored clays, because in the original building there's darkish green Adobe, there's light colored Adobe, and there's red colored Adobe. So they're slowly putting this back together with the original materials. If you're going to make an Adobe building now, they're still a great building material, but they need to be reinforced so that they cannot fall over. They're more stable. And this is one being built. The Adobe bricks reinforced with rebar up through the centers of some of them, so to make sure those walls do not topple. Cob is similar to Adobe, but it's not used in brick form. When you're making a cob wall, usually you put down a rock foundation and then handfuls of this Adobe-like mixture. It's clay and straw and sand and water made into this kind of thick mud-like form. Handfuls are put onto the rocks and the wall is built up as a solid wall of cob. It's not made into separate bricks and joined by mortar. So when you end with the end product of a cob building is what we call a monolithic structure. The whole form of walls of that structure are all one piece of solid cob. The clay inside the cob mixture provides the compressive strength, vertical up and down. It can hold something up like the rest of the wall. And the fiber provides the tensile strength, the lateral strength. It holds the cob wall together from side to side. And the fiber is usually wheat or barley straw or rice straw. In the past, like I said, it was manure. And of course, clay provides the compressive strength of that piece of cob. The foremost building material in England in the 13th through 18th centuries was cob, before brick was invented and able to be transported pretty long distances, where brick became the big building material. Cob was before that. Cob is a building material used throughout the world. The top image is showing you 6 to 8 story buildings made mostly of cob in Yemen, and the bottom two images are showing you 8th century buildings in Trulli, Italy, that are made partly from cob. It's been around a long time. And cob has been used more locally too, here in California. It's tended to be utilized more recently by people that are looking for an alternative lifestyle, earthy people. And so you see the homes made out of cob these days of having a real organic, kind of earthy, artsy look to them, like you see in the images. The rough recipe for cob is about 30% clay, 70% aggregate, which is sand or small sifted rock, and then straw added and water. And you have to work with it a lot to know just the right amounts of each of those, because your clay is going to have different consistency in different places. The aggregate can change a little bit too, so you mess around with it and you figure out what is the right consistency to make that wall nice and solid and easy to work with too as you make it. Here's some creative examples of windows put into cob walls. Again, they have that organic kind of earthy look. With you can see these those in the central left picture with a series of archways. The archways were created just by the cob on top of the glass. The glass itself didn't have to be arched like you would have in a conventional window, but you can do almost anything with the cob on top of it to be creative with. And it looks like they added cob to make it look like a branch going through those windows too. Wheat straw and rice straw have different functions for cob, and one would be chosen like wheat straw is a longer stalk and it's more for cob structures, where rice straw is shorter stalked and you chop it up finer, and that's good for a plaster, meaning like an outer final layer that's really smooth. This cob bench was made in one weekend at a workshop at the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center. So some people had never done cob work. They joined this weekend workshop. They learned how to do it. They created this this design and did it. You can see what's really basic in most cob structures is they're up off the ground, so on some kind of rock foundation. It looks like these are chunks of used concrete, and then the cob sits on top of it. And what that does is it prevents water from wicking from the soil into the cob. So having cob get wet is one of its problems. I mean, it's not really a problem, but it's a weakness. You wouldn't want it to get wet or it will tend to fall apart. It needs to dry out and become like a brick. So you have it up off the ground. It's said that cob structures need good boots, that's the rock foundation, so they're up off the wet ground, and a hat, meaning the cob itself needs to have some type of roof over it to protect it from precipitation and rainfall and the elements, so it doesn't get wet for any prolonged period of time, because then it would start to fall apart. A very cool cob oven made to look like a dragon, and this looks like a pizza oven or any type of oven, and you just insert the coals and the wood in there and let those fire up, and then you can cook inside of it. How those are made usually is there's a brick base, and then what they'll do is they'll put sand in a kind of a dome shape and then put the cob on top of it. Usually you can build this round domed cob structure, and then once that's dried out, you can scoop the sand away and it becomes a hollow cob structure that turns into an oven. There's a number of people I know that have them around here in Santa Barbara, and they work great and they're really fun, easy to put one in your backyard, and very inexpensive. You can do it yourself and learn how to do it very quickly. Here's a cob building up at the Aurelia Ranch on the Gaviota Coast. They have an event center there for music or weddings, etc. And this building was made from the local cob and the local clay, which is very black. It makes a beautiful, natural, dark gray cob color. And then they tinted the top part that is also still cob, but it looks green and has kelp painted all over the exterior of that top part. And they've got a solar oven there sitting in the very front. So when you're making cob, you have a base plaster, and there's the recipe for it there. So it's a more chunky plaster, or cob form. It's not going to have as smooth of a final finish. The finished plaster is just sand and clay and ground up a little bit of fiber, so it's very smooth. That's what you're looking at here with these images, is the finished plaster, is the last layer. And it's very attractive. And again, you could make these straight and perpendicular, sharp cornered walls. They don't have to be curvy like this, but pretty cool looking as it is. Quail Springs Permaculture Farm has interns there, and they built these cottages. They're small little studio cottages all out of cob. Another one of the intern cottages made of cob at Quail Springs. The total cost for this structure was about $16,000, and then you're done. No mortgage, nothing. Less than 500 square feet. It has very few permitting laws, but it is a very durable home that you can repair yourself. It's cozy, it's very insulated, keeps cool in the summer, keeps warm in the winter, has a small wood burning stove. Just kind of nice to know that there's alternatives to the conventional home that you can do yourself and not be locked into a really long mortgage. Kind of going back to more traditional housing is the idea that cob reflects more of the local environment in geology. Where there's clay, cob homes would be the sustainable, appropriate choice. Where there's a lot of timber, a wood home would be appropriate choice. Rock homes. So in Quail Springs, there's a lot of naturally occurring clay, and they chose cob because of that. Santa Barbara, we have a lot of clay too. It's just different type and color, and you have to add a little bit more sand and fiber to make it work because our clay is so heavy here on the coast. Here are some talking points about the benefits of cob. It requires 75% less energy than conventional wall systems, reduces up to 80% of global climate change impacts as opposed to compared systems of our normal timber framed homes, and a number of other positives to it. So much more sustainable. Here's another really neat example of a cob home, not locally, but in Thailand. This house was built in 6 weeks for $9,000. Check it out. Straw bales are also considered a natural building material. They can be used to infill walls that already exist, built by something other, like out of wood or metal frame, and then the straw bales are used to infill those walls stacked on top of each other. But the straw bale walls can't be load-bearing. They're not strong enough. They don't have that compressive strength to hold up a roof of a building. So the timber frame, a framed, wood-framed building can be reinforced with straw bales alongside it, but again, it can't be load-bearing. Some more examples from Quail Springs out in Cuyama, about an hour north of Ojai on the Highway 33. When they first started this permaculture farm, they inherited a large pole barn. On the bottom of this picture, you're seeing the straw bales that were carried over and used to stack on top of each other alongside the existing metal framed walls of their building. So they were using those as wall filler and insulation, the straw bales themselves. Here's another picture, bigger picture, of that straw bale building that was at Quail Springs. You can see the pole barn is that reddish metal that was already existing there on site because this was a sheep ranch in the past. And then they infilled by building walls. You can see the wood-framed doors and windows that they were putting in within the metal structure that was already there, and then using the straw bale to fill in inside that wood frame and make the walls thick and insulative. Here's a good picture that shows you what the first cob type of plaster can be if you're working with cob. That would be a what looks like in this picture that's been cobbed over a wooden post. So it looks pretty rough. You can see the straw fibers in it. It's not smooth. It's not meant to be the final surface. That's the first rough coat of something like a cob plaster. The finished plasters that are either second or third coat on top of that rough plaster, as the plaster gets closer to the finished texture, there's less fiber, or the fiber's chopped up to finer bits, and there's less aggregate. So you're just having pretty much like a mortar, you're having sand and clay at the end. And these finished plasters can be very smooth as you want them to be, as smooth as a sheetrock wall. You can see that in the orange kitchen, and where they tinted that final clay plaster too before they put it on. And they'll oil it with linseed oil, something like that, that seals it. So you can even have a shower inside of a shower done with this type of plaster, and it repels water. It's just like tiling, and they can give a very finished, beautiful look. Earth bags are another natural building material type. We are taking bags that are used something like for a flood barrier, like filled with sand, and you can fill them with any kind of earth and stack them on top of each other as the primary building material, like you would cinder block, and then you plaster on top of that. So the earth bag homes are very sturdy. They just take the bags, they take some barbed wire that's put in between the layers of the bags to hold those bags in place, and then plastering with something like cob on top of that to give a smooth finished surface. Here's the inside of a earth bag home. They're often done in dome-shaped or circular shapes because that's the strongest that these bags, when they're configured in a dome or circular shape and they come up to a point, the top part and the arch itself is supported by the pressure down that is translated all the way down through the walls. It's a very strong structure. They have kind of a Moroccan look there, but really can be very attractive. In Hesperia, California, here in Southern California, is the earth bag kind of mecca, the Cal Earth Institute, where they've experimented and made quite a few earth bag super Adobe type homes. That's all the pictures you've seen. These last three images are all from Cal Earth, and even that really finished one when you were looking at the inside. So these are really easy to build. They don't take a lot of skills, something you can learn in a couple of weeks or learn by apprenticing to someone that's doing it pretty quickly. And they're very sturdy, and they can be used with mostly local, or be made with mostly local materials. And there's a variety of other types of natural building materials and methods. I won't read all of this, but there's, I'll go briefly through a couple more. Rammed earth is when you create a mold, just like you were going to pour concrete into a mold. You could kind of jam and ram earth into that mold, earth that's high clay content, and it can be formed and dry into what is a very beautiful solid wall. Let's look at a couple of images of those. Here's a finished rammed earth wall with a window in it. Gives a very smooth, straight surface. It looks like it's all one solid piece of stone, but those are actually layers of different colored clay that were rammed into the mold sequentially. And a couple of images of a rammed earth home in the making. The bottom right is actually showing you when they first starting building the wall, and then the mold, once that rammed earth is put into the mold, a couple feet deep, then the mold is moved up, as you're seeing on the upper left picture, and more earth is rammed into it, and it just keeps going up, 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 and makes a really very solid structure, monolithic like cob homes too. Of course, in other parts of the world, stones and clay and earth materials aren't as common, aren't as easy to get, and perhaps something like bamboo is very easy to grow or grows well or is native to that area. In Asia, Central America, and South America, there's a lot of bamboo, and bamboo homes can easily be built. Beautiful picture of a bamboo home. And what is more conventional for North America, the timber framed homes. Some of these can be made more sustainable if they're built without power tools or metal hardware or any kind of joiners like screws, metals, bolts, brackets, things like that. They can be done like the old school way, like the Amish do, with just pegs and cut for the boards to wedge together. That would make that house more of a natural building material. And of course, timber framing would be something that would be sustainable and appropriate in an area with a lot of timber. Let's look at a few images from Aurelia Ranch here on the Gaviota Coast, and some of the natural building examples they have created there at their event venue that I showed you a little while previously in this same lecture. They built a multi-stall dressing room and bathroom for when they do have public events on site, music, concerts, weddings. They needed that, so they started off with a timber framed building. There are lots of different variations of these natural building methods. In this one here, still at Aurelia Ranch, on that same bathroom, changing room building, they wove bamboo strips for the interior of the walls that ran between and inside of that wood frame bathroom. And then they put cob over that. So those woven bamboo walls were a surface that the cob could adhere to. And then on top of that cob, they put designs and they got creative to make it look attractive. And in the same building, they used some of the local manzanita wood and shapes and designs. They actually integrated the wood into the building itself and even some of the designs onto the surface of the cob. And this is an outdoor shower area, and they made it very simply by using actually sheets from thrift stores stretched onto bamboo frames. So none of these are local materials, but they certainly are very conserving and resource efficient by using used goods. And this is the solar hot water heater for those showers, just perched up high above the showers themselves. Gets hot during the day, and it can be used anytime after that. And here's a few slides from Quail Springs, a few more. This little building is named Margarita. It's a little casita, as they call it at Quail Springs. And it's a nice, just little one-bedroom guest house. This is a cob structure. You can see the outer walls are very smooth and finished. It has a nice roof on it to keep the water or precipitation off of the cob walls for the most part. Window, door, those things are easy to put in. This is even got conduit for electrical and plumbing into it with a little sink inside and a little built-in cob stove or fireplace. And it has a nice boots too. There's actually rocks for the foundation that are covered up with a little bit of cob to give it a more finished look. Just a beautiful design that was done on the finished plaster of that same casita. So you can get really artful with these. Here's a picture of one of my past classes making cob at Quail Springs, putting the ingredients, the clay, the straw, the sand, a little bit of aggregate and water onto a tarp and using their feet to mix it and roll it and smush it all together before it is applied to the building. All the materials for these cob buildings at Quail Springs, most of the materials I should say, were from that same site in the high desert there. So they would take this kind of gravelly material from near the river, the creek bed, and they would sift it through screens to get really fine gravel, and that was used in the cob mixture. After the cob gets properly mixed with the feet, then it's put into these buckets, which are then carried to the structure itself and added in handfuls to build up the walls. Some used bottles were wired to this frame, which was inserted into the wall as it's being built, and then the cob is placed over that with the bottles being partially exposed on both sides. So inside you get a beautiful array of, it looks like kind of like a stained glass effect inside. Just a fun way to reuse old glass and add some beauty to your building. And here's a place to store the clay and the water slip, as we call it, and that can be used directly there for making mortar or used to make fine plasters, but also taken and added to with more gravel and straw to make the beginning plaster as well, just the cob itself. And here, somewhat local or southwestern United States resources for creating natural buildings. Aurelia Ranch, as I mentioned, those are people you could talk to and visit there. Quail Springs, same thing. They're always happy to share their knowledge, and most of the time you can go visit there if you'd like to learn more. Ampersand in Santa Fe County, New Mexico. Earthship also, they both have buildings that are natural buildings, an alternative, and they're happy to share knowledge. They're educators. All of these places have workshops and ways for you to come in and learn as a student of natural building also. Spirit Pine Sanctuary in Ojai is a private family, but that family of run by Betty Seaman. She is amazing and a wonderful host. Many of my students have just called her and asked if they could come stay for a couple of days, and she will feed you and allow you to work on her different cob structures on her property, kind of near the Sedgwick Preserve, and you can learn a lot and have a lot of fun. And one of the original West Coast cob builders was Yonto Evans at Cobb Cottage up in Oregon. So I hope you enjoyed learning about all this and hope you get a chance to give it a try.